the topic today was actually partly inspired by 2B because we had a previous conversation talking about drugs, and you talked about bodily autonomy and how we should view that through society. So, yeah, so I'll introduce the topic. What should the limits be for bodily autonomy? Should we really let everyone do anything to their bodies? Okay. Yeah, so I want to dig into this. So we can do introductions and then jump from there. So, RiverboatJack.
In general, I believe that bodily autonomy is like the bedrock of like society and specifically like democratic societies in general. Um, and if we were to get like more specific, are there scenarios in which I believe bodily autonomy can or should be violated? Very, very, very few, and those should be taken into under extreme scrutiny, right? For example, it might be beneficial to violate bodily autonomy to inoculate a population against like a deadly pandemic disease, just hypothetically, you know. Um, but there are other situations in which bodily autonomy it should absolutely not be violated in any way. So I'm looking forward to having this discussion with everyone here, and maybe my mind can be changed. Maybe we can come to a different understanding, and I look forward to that.
Awesome. I hadn't actually, when I was coming up with this question, I hadn't considered the pandemic really. I was thinking of a bunch of other scenarios, but not the pandemic, like the obvious one. But thank you for that. Let's go to Wick.
Okay, so I think there are very clear scenarios where we it is in society's interest to put limits on bodily autonomy. I think the most obvious one is suicide. We do not want to condone or allow people to just end themselves and end their bodies. Obviously, we can't stop it entirely, um, but we can definitely put forward programs in place that will combat against it. I think that's a very extreme example, but it's a very pressing one. We talk about less pressing examples, perhaps. I think when we talk about things like allowing people to permanently disfigure their bodies, say someone for whatever reason decided I don't want my eyes anymore. We should not be allowing them to go to a medical professional and a professional to remove their eyes. I think there's a very good reason that society would condemn those things and put a stop to those things and try to prevent those things from happening. And yes, it's extreme. Yes, it sounds absurd, but uh, what I mean, the question was what are the limits to body autonomy? And I think those things are the limits. Uh, when you look at a procedure and you can say this will do more harm than the potential good the procedure would do. And there are certain cases where we can just draw a very, very clear line. That's my position here.
Let's go to Pathos.
Yeah. So when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking first about in terms of the law and what the purpose of the law is in our society and how like legal matters work all together. And then I started thinking about, well, technically, if I wanted to lay it out on a table saw, there's no law that can stop me from doing that. And so I think I'm closer with Wick here in that it's more about what do we allow people to medically pursue and allow doctors to do to them. Because literally, you can do whatever you want with your body and you suffer the consequence directly, individually. In terms of what laws do in societies, they promote a, a common good for the society at a baseline morality, very bottom baseline morality. So those are the things that I was thinking about in this conversation. I think that ultimately, I'm more libertarian. I believe that if people want to use their body as a mechanism to make money via OnlyFans or prostitution, they should be allowed to do that. But should they be allowed to sell their kidneys on the black market? That's something where I would draw the line at. So, yeah, I'm interested in having a conversation and more clearly defining where my line is because it's something that I haven't really deeply considered until today. So, yeah.
Thank you, thank you. Let's go to oh, Pirate Empress. Thank you for the 100 bits. Thank you, Pirate Empress. She's She runs the nice little channel over there. We rate her sometime. Hope you're having a great night. Thanks for the support. Let's go to Top Dolphin.
Yeah, bodily autonomy is based. I think people who have a sound mind should have complete bodily autonomy, assuming said bodily autonomy doesn't harm other people. So if a person is in the right frame of mind and they're not harming other people, people should be able to do whatever they want. Whether that's drugs, whether that's like I like Wick brought up suicide. Like I would contend with him on that. Like I think if somebody like I don't think people really disagree with this, but we can get to that. But I think if someone decides that like, oh, like we should be able to like I've evaluated my life and I've considered that I want to have suicide. And we assume that they're in like the right frame of mind and they're making the decision logically, I guess, you know, like or like they're making it with a sound mind, they should be able to like kill themselves or and I think you can kind of get like that's like a very good general rule, but you can kind of like draw lines like when are you harming other people, like how much harm to other people is okay, because like obviously yourself like your family might be like sad, so like but is that worth like for example if you're like a vegetable in a hospital who can't like can't do anything and you want to like euthanasia like type suicide, like it's like a balancing scale. So but for the most part I say as long as no harm's being done you should be able to do whatever you want, and then there are situations in which harm like small harms are done, but like bodily autonomy like or harm should be okay.
To be.
Yeah, I guess for me, when I was thinking about this topic, I felt not well equipped to deal with it. So I looked up the underlying philosophy, like what sort of events led to the concept of autonomy. And the definition that I wrote down was it's basically the idea that an individual is free to make choices about their own actions for reasons that are their own, and their choices are not persuaded in favor of or against by norms, customs, restrictions, etc. of the society they are occupying. Now, I take problem with that second part because as I got deeper into the philosophy of autonomy, it's that second part seems not to be important in terms of other things affecting their opinion on things and all that. Because when I looked at what led to the formation of autonomy, it seems to come from modernist philosophy, particularly Kantian philosophy, and it was basically invented as a refutation. This philosophical framework was developed as a refutation of sovereignty. And sovereignty is an affront to our own autonomy because that's to say whatever the presiding power is, it takes precedence in assigning what things you ought to be able to do, what things you're allowed to do. And so this is why we have this concept of autonomy. And there's so many different delineations of autonomy and what kinds of autonomy we're going to talk about. There's like bodily autonomy that people talk about, ideal autonomy, and they have different conditions, whether they're favor more competent, what they call competency conditions or authenticity conditions. But basically, I came up with a few questions that I was left after reading all this, which is why in a representative democracy can we not potentiate the expression of an authentic self, and why should unfettered expression of the authentic self be considered virtuous and given freedom? Is it not true that societies need to place limits on the expression of some parts of our authentic selves to remain functional amongst a plurality of expressions, some of which may be at odds with each other? And cannot individuals establish sovereignty over others by force and diminish the expression of authentic selves by forceful expression of another authentic self? Is authentically embracing a limitation of highest concern or troubling even? What properties should autonomy suffer assertion from? Self-government, choice competence, individual category, desirousness of choice, and or freedom versus autonomy. So I think this is the conversation of autonomy. I think we need to separate that between autonomy and then freedom, because what I think people are often talking about in these autonomy conversations are freedom, which is the ability to enact the autonomous conclusion that you've arrived at in your head. It seems to me that the nature of autonomy is really only dealing with the choice that you decide to make in your head and what leads you, what is motivating that choice. Is it your own volition or is it the influences of society around you? Then when it comes to the enactment of that autonomous choice, that seems to get into freedom, which is which philosophers would draw a delineation between those two things.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Tommy, for another $20. Everyone is free to do that with their body, is to take out their credit card and use it on this channel. I think that's something that needs to be protected. All right, do that in my life. All right, so open to the panel. And again, thank you, Tommy. It was really kind of you.
Okay, so I just want to kind of drill down with Tubi's kind of last bit there. So I think the freedom discussion is much more interesting than the autonomy discussion as you define it there, because the autonomy discussion is, should we be free from influences? And I don't think it's possible to be free from influences, especially society's influence. I don't think there's anyone on this earth who is totally free from outside influences, nor do I think that it's a desirable that we are totally free from outside influences. I think it's a good thing that the society has influence over the individual. I think that yes, it can be used for ill, but we also have ways that we influence people to get the vaccine. We influence people to eat healthy. We influence people to take care of themselves, because we know as a society that generally these things will lead to happier lives, and happier lives are something I think that should be a goal for society in general. Now, to talk a little bit to Dolphin there, I think there are cases where euthanasia and things like that, where those are acceptable forms. I wouldn't have any issue with that. But suicide does real harm to people. It really does. And allowing someone who is otherwise perfectly happy, who just happens to at that time just not be feeling like they want to live, we should not condone that, and we should not help that. And in fact, we should work against that. If someone is having suicidal ideation, you should take them to the hospital and get them help, because you do not want that to happen. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem that they're having, and you don't want that. And I think that again, euthanasia is a little different. I will agree with you there, but when we talk about limits and placing on autonomy and freedom to do things, I think that we should work to we should not be allowing medical procedures that allow suicide or disfigurement that is not psychologically beneficial.
So like I want to push back against this idea, like with when it comes to like suicide, right? The reason that we as a society tell people who participate in suicidal ideation to get help and to not kill themselves is because we make the assumption, and this is generally true, like for the vast majority of people it's true, right? That people who want to commit suicide are mentally ill, right? However, like the difference, the reason we see like euthanasia is different, even though it's the exact same thing, is because it's a situation in which a lot of people can empathize with like people making that calculation of whether or not they want to live or die. And most people would probably be like, not most, but a lot of people are more okay with that situation than like a young 22-year-old making that calculation. But assuming that like someone's not mentally ill and they're in a sound mind, which is like one of the premises that I said, like there would be no reason that people shouldn't have the right to be able to take their own lives. People should live their lives on their term, and if somebody wanted to kill themselves, I think I don't know if it's worth like instituting government procedures in which you do it, but it would be but maybe, because it's like your ability to choose whether you live or die is probably the greatest amount of bodily autonomy that you have.
So just to step in, we need to make some clarifications, right? So we've been throwing around the term suicide, euthanasia, but there's another term for something that is legal in a lot of different states in the United States, right? And that is physician-assisted death. That is the technically correct term for this, and that's legal in California, Colorado, District of Columbia, Hawaii, Oregon, Vermont, Washington, and probably more since the last time I looked into this issue. And when we actually take a look at what these laws say, and I'm going to do a direct quote here from a lot of the legislation. Actions taken in accordance with the law shall not for any purpose constitute suicide, assisted suicide, mercy killing, or homicide under the law. And so in a lot of these different states, these laws have been looked at by organizations like the American Medical Student Association, the American Association of Suicidology, and they have all come to the conclusion that physicians assisting patients who are in sound mind, who are educated and brought up to speed on the topic, that is 100% ethical and medically sound. And like, I mean, you can cringe all you want, but like, this is literally medical organizations that specialize in the study of suicide, in the study of self-harm, et cetera, and they have all come together to basically be like, yep, this is pretty sound. I mean, I can continue listing them off: the American Medical Women's Association, California Medical Association, Vermont Medical Society, Washington State Psychological Association, American College of Legal Medicine. Like,
Then I understand that a lot of people would disagree with me here, but you can cite 1,000 of these organizations and it won't sway me on this position. You have to use arguments.
oh, for sure.
Wait, okay, wait.
I'm delineating between the thing that you stated,
Sure.
which is suicide, which for a lot of people involves like getting a rope in the barn and hanging yourself, or euthanasia, which involves like a scary doctor injecting you with a needle, and what is actually legal in parts of the United States, which is physician-assisted death. These are all three distinct things. So when we're talking about it, we should probably use the right terminology. And we should also be aware, if we're going to talk about this issue, of how this actually functions. Because it's not like you go into a clinic and you're like, I would like to die, please. And then they're just like, yep, roll up your sleeves, you're going to die. All right, like it doesn't work like that. And to kind of portray it as like people doing snap judgment decisions, I think does a disservice to the people who are actually seeking to die with some measure of dignity, to die not because they are necessarily deranged in some way, but because they've thought it over and they've come to the conclusion that, yeah, they want off this train and they want off on their own terms. And I think that's not really unreasonable.
Let's go to Pathos, and then we'll go to 2B.
Yeah, I think the bottom, like the core of our question here is, in how much does the state, and the state meaning our political republic or our agreed upon government, how much does the state get to control the decisions of an individual when it's in relation to their body? Now, we're going to the extreme, because I think we have a tendency to do this as human beings. We want to point to the extreme arguments because they make our points the strongest. And so we jump towards the suicide, we jump towards the assisted death, we jump towards the word that I use, prostitution, things that like punch at all these little things that are culturally conditioned in us. But the core of the question is, to what degree does the state have control over an individual influencing the decisions that they want to make with their body? And I think if we can realign the conversation towards that, we could probably get closer towards at least understanding one another, as opposed to because these things are so subjective in terms of when is it okay for someone to take their own life or to decide that they are done participating in this grand experiment. That's so subjective and it's so broad and unique to each individual. I think it's a better and more productive conversation if we talk about in which way. So I'm just going to drill it down. For example, right now, I can walk a quarter block up my street, go to my liquor store, and buy enough alcohol to kill myself within consuming something that's FDA approved for human consumption, aka alcohol. And the government in the state of Michigan is perfectly okay with that ideology. They're saying, hey, if you have $2,000 in your account, Ricky Wells, you can go and buy $2,000 worth of alcohol. And there's nothing in the system to stop me from doing that. However, if I decide to buy $2,000 worth of heroin or cocaine, the state has a response to that. And so the question is, the state subjectively picks and chooses when they decide which things we're allowed to do to our bodies. And my idea is that that's based on what the state wants out of its citizens. The state wants a type of citizen to encourage the society to keep the giant machine that we call America running. and we are going to legalize and allow autonomy, body autonomy, for the things that allow that mechanism to keep moving, and we're going to criminalize the things that disrupt that. This is the big conversation we're having with with marijuana or weed or cannabis, however you want to call it, is because the state has said, well, we want a society of people that does not do cannabis. And so we're going to make it criminalized on a federal level. So in my mind, that's where the conversation needs to lie at. And what degree does a state have the right to regulate, criminalize, prosecute an individual's personal choices?
Yeah, Wick, I was just going to ask, what was the specific problem that you had with suicide? Again, can you rephrase that one more time?
Oh, so my specific problem isn't necessarily with suicide, but with state sponsored and state incentivized. I believe the RiverboatJack corrected me, and it's a physician assisted death is the legal term. I simply I assume for it. And like I said, in certain cases, like for example, paraplegic, and in other cases like you're terminally ill, which I would consider, it's okay. I think that should be looked at. I do not know the specifics of what requirements are to get approved, I guess would be the term, for physician assisted death. But I would hope that they're very, very stringent, very, very high, because as a society, there is value in sending signals to our population. When Pathos was just talking right there, he mentions legalization. I would go a step further. What should society and what should the state incentivize? Not just criminalize, but what should they promote and what should they work and rail against? And that can be done through criminalization, but there are other ways to try to dissuade a population from going down certain routes. And I think there is a value into dissuading the population from ending their life.
So you don't have a problem with someone going and making the choice to commit suicide. You just have a problem with if the state signs off on it, if the state assists you.
It's all about pragmatism here, because you can't stop someone. If someone wants to end their life, they're going to end their life. There's nothing you can do. They're just gonna do it. But you do not have to incentivize that. You do not have to make it easier. You can work against it and dissuade.
But is it incentivizing? But hold on, is it incentive?
Okay.
Oh, you can go. You can go.
I was just going to say, would it help if I described what the actual process is like?
Please, yeah.
Okay. So first off, you have to be over 18 and you have to be a resident of one of the states that's legalized this practice. Then basically you go in, and attending and consulting physicians determine whether or not you are mentally capable, right? If, in the opinion of either of the consulting physicians, because you are seen by multiple doctors, you are deemed to have like a mental disorder of some kind, or like significant depression that's impairing your judgment, then you're referred to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. These referrals are documented. In fact, each step of this process is documented, and often people do bounce off at each one of these steps. So this is a system that is designed to not encourage this, but to provide an avenue for people who are both mentally sound and capable of making this decision. Then reports from the psychiatrist or psychologist are documented in the patient's medical record. Then on top of that, the attending physicians and consulting physicians, they come back and they're like, okay, we need to decide if you are suffering from a terminal disease, a condition which is incurable and irreversible, and within reasonable medical judgment would produce death within 6 months.
Okay.
Now,
I have no problem with that.
That can be something that is like mental too, like significant like mental anguish has been deemed in the past to be justification, because it is ruled that like within 6 months this person's mental anguish isn't going to be going away. Now those cases are very rare, but they do happen. And so then there is a formal request by the patient for medication that would end life. and there's a 15-day waiting period after the first oral request, to which there must be witnesses. And the legal implementation of this actually requires 3 different requests, 2 of them oral, 1 written. The first one begins the process, and then the second must be made at least 15 days after the initial request. And then the written request must be made 48 hours before the prescription. Because we need to remember that doctors, especially in the United States, are super, super vulnerable to lawsuits. And these doctors especially. So they have documentation for each and every step, and they are by no means encouraging patients to off themselves. They're giving them every avenue possible at their disposal. And then you need a witness to the final request for the medication as it's being written. And then they're given the medication, but the physician doesn't like put it in the mouth or basically inject it.
Yep.
Doesn't have any role in that. Basically just provides the medication, and then the patient is free to take it whenever they so choose. Now,
Okay,
some patients don't wind up taking the medication when they get it.
So I guess the important part here is the dead in 6 months, the terminal illness bit. And I think that really changes the whole dynamic of this process and of this thing. There is definitely a limit. That is a substantial limit to who is available and who this is made available for. And so the existence of these things, I do not think would violate my tendency to dislike suicide, to want to dissuade it. Given that that's a stringent standard, and assuming that they hold to that standard, and I'd have to look at the cases of these mental traumas to know I don't, so I'm not going to speak to that. But assuming that that's the case, I do not think that would be promoting suicide as a culture. I think so, because it has a very strict limit.
Athos?
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
So I'm listening, and I think it's very all very intriguing, right? But I think some things I want to just talk about in general. Women are allowed to. All right, I'm going to butcher this phrasing. Throw me up on the cross later. Women are literally allowed to have surrogate babies. They're allowed to rent their uterus, right? They're allowed to say, "I'm going to carry another baby until full term, using my body, the resources, the natural provisions that I can build into my body." And often, to my understanding, they are paid for this. They're allowed to rent their bodies out, right? But we also have a society in which women are not allowed, in most of the states, to say to themselves, "I would like to provide sexual services for at my discretion." Right? In a legalized, self-unionized, safe environment. That's not something that happens in our country. Another example of the strong dichotomy, and this is where the legality of things is what I'm trying to point to. I'm trying to point to the legality in terms of what legal system is designed to promote a society, right? The bottom line morality, not the highest tier of morality, but the lowest level of agreed morality, what legal systems are supposed to do. Ethics and morality are higher, but legalization is a different category. Another example of this is I am allowed, I'm in Michigan, I'm by Pfizer. I can donate my body to a drug test. If Pfizer has a new drug they want to test, I am allowed to go and receive compensation in terms of money and allow Pfizer to test a drug on me. But in the same breath, I am not allowed to donate a testicle or a kidney and sell it on eBay to the highest scientific, research center and do that, right? Women are not allowed to take their eggs and sell their eggs to the highest bidder. They can't go on eBay and open up a Craigslist like, "Hey, I got 500,000 little eggs here. I can sell them off." That's something that's not allowed. And so what I'm trying to say is that in our society, we have a spectrum of legality of these things are allowed, but these things are not allowed. And the reason why certain things are allowed and legal is because of, once again, what is that society trying to promote and what is the goals of that society. And that's pretty much, in my mind, what determines what is legal and what is allowed to do. We keep hopping to the suicide topic, which is, I'm sorry, suicide is a bad phrase. I know there's different phrasing for it. But we keep focusing in on that. And I think it's kind of a red herring because there's a lot under this umbrella in terms of body autonomy. And we're kind of doing a disservice if we only focus on end of life, because there's a whole bunch of bookends. There's a whole lot of things between those bookends of beginning of life and end of life. One more thing, and I'll cede the floor. On my driver's license, I can check a box and say, if I am to expire in a car accident, you can take my organs and do whatever you will with them. Give my heart to the person who needs it, give my kidneys to the people who need it, eyeballs, whatever. But I cannot do that to say, hey, I'm 3 months behind on my mortgage, kidney goes for $50,000 on Craigslist, let me put one up and trade it for Bitcoin, right? And that's a clear distinguishment because the legal system is designed because we want to say to ourselves, we don't want a society that encourages selling our organs. And yeah, I'll see you there and go on.
Pathos,
Yep.
you're saying a lot of amazing stuff. I love it. This is exactly where I want to take the conversation because we will get lost on the suicide part, right? And which is important. It's an important part of this conversation. But this is exactly where I envision taking this, comparing exactly where, just distinguishing where we draw a line here, right? Like there is this bright line, and I think for so many people that line has always been there, and they think, well, that's exactly where it should be, right? And we don't examine it. And once you show the dichotomy between these two situations, right, that seem very similar, but still are on the opposite ends of this bright line, you're like, well,
Right.
why is that there? Like, why? Like,
Right.
you start to question it. So I'm truly loving where you're taking this, and it's really I want to take this conversation. So, Tubi, if you want, and I'm not sure, Adam, if you want something to say after that, and then
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Tubi.
Yeah. So I was just gonna say that I see where Pathos is coming from, but I disagree that there's the base level laws and then there's morality and ethics up here. I think the law is one way that we've come up with for embodying these base level morals and ethics. And I think we establish laws for different reasons. Some of them are based off of functionality, like, yeah, they allow our society to function this way. I think some of them are presented as that way, like they are good for our society and they allow our society to function this way. But I think there's a different protestation for something like legalizing prostitution versus approving some kind of infrastructure bill. Yeah, to a certain extent, both of them are concerned with what makes a functional society. But I think the underlying moral and ethical basis for why you would be in favor or against those two things is different. Like, for instance, when Doobie is talking about not wanting to allow drugs, he's not talking about people's autonomy to do things in that case. People can, and I'm pretty sure in his head, people can do drugs or whatever. He's making an argument against their freedom to do so. So he would be saying, like, oh, doing this promotes this kind of culture in society, and then that culture is harmful. But I think that's different than why he would argue against, for instance, legalizing prostitution, because in that case, I think he's arguing against their autonomy to do so, because he's saying, like, oh, a capitalist system robs you of your autonomy to engage in that system, free of any coercive influence like capitalism, etc. So one is more about talking about the freedoms of people and the kind of culture that they create. The other one is talking about, in some way, it's commenting on the culture it creates, but the fundamental basis for his protestation is completely different. It's challenging the level of autonomy, not the level of freedom. He even admits that if you could have a version of porn that allows people their autonomy, then he would be possibly for that. So it's not. So I think they're trying to do this general thing of like promoting a society that functions, but I don't think that the laws come before the morals and ethics. And I think those are actually the base level. The laws and all that stuff, I think those are the higher level where we're trying to codify all of this stuff into these neat little categories of like, this is acceptable because of this logical syllogism. Yeah.
Pathos.
Really quick to that.
Pathos, just 1 second. When you're not talking, please mute. You got like a thing with your mic, like a like a noise level issue, right? And we can work on that later on. Me or you and your cousin. But one or the other, yeah, just mute yourself when you're not talking because we get like a little static afterwards. But you can respond. Go ahead, please.
So I think an example of what I'm trying to say in terms of the law providing the base level of ethics and morality is, for example, if I come across a homeless person, the law says that I cannot hurt that homeless person. I cannot punch him. I cannot engage in bodily harm to that person. The ethics of me as an individual is, do I want to give that homeless person money? And there's no law that says that I have to give that person money. So when I'm talking about the distinguishment between laws, ethics, and morality, it's because we have such a diverse and broad society. And because our morality and ethics are so broad that by nature, our laws become the most common denominator that most of us can agree on going forward. And I know it's not always perfect, but I think that homeless example really points to that. See a homeless person, I'm not allowed to punch that person. That's the law. There's no law that says I have to donate money to that homeless person directly. That comes to my personal ethics and my personal morality and code of living. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and but that ethic that you would practice in that case, that respects both your autonomy and your freedom, because you're not forced by the government to pay them that way, and your autonomy is being respected because you can, through your life experience or through whatever, if you want to allow for social distortion of your views, you still come to the conclusion that you want to do that, and then you have the freedom to act on that volition. So I think in that case, both your autonomy and your freedoms are being respected.
Okay, I see what you're saying. That's a good point.
I just to engage with a couple things that Pathos said, and I think where my line personally is here is that any kind of procedure, anything that you do that will permanently harm your body should be discouraged, if not criminalized. So, for example, um, if you want to sell your kidney because you don't have enough money, that does permanent harm. It won't kill you. You can still survive, but it limits you in a way that reasonably we can say that you're not going to get that back. Um, and I think we want these laws to limit that autonomy, because if we allow it, it creates really perverse incentives in society. It creates this kind of a market that we can sell parts of our body, to try to make ends meet. And I think the knockoff effects of that are just so bad. And dystopian books have been written about this shit. We have really dystopian sci-fi shows that we can see that show that the harm that this can possibly do. It's just a road we don't want to go down. And so there are exceptions to this, but for the most part, I would say that my firm line in the sand here is, if what you're doing causes permanent, irreversible harm, it should be extremely limited, if not just outright illegal.
Oh, Wick.
Wait, but you don't need to agree with this, Wick, okay? And I'll tell you why. All right, so if my brother is dying of kidney cancer, am I allowed to donate my kidney to him?
Yes, but you're not selling it. There's a difference.
Yeah, so your problem isn't the harm that someone's doing to their own body. Your problem is trading that harm for a financial incentive.
Fair enough.
Right?
Fair enough.
Right?
Okay. Yeah, sure. That better defines it than I did. Thank you.
Yeah. So my point here is we participate in some people participate in versions of self-harm, right? Some that are good, some are bad. But all the time we make decisions that harm ourselves in many different ways. You can harm yourself socially, you can harm yourself physically, mentally, and we as a society have decided that a lot of the time trading that harm for money is not okay, right? Because there's perverse incentives. In terms of the organ donation system, I believe I kind of think you were pulling on a really good thread, is that we kind of do it because because money can be a bad motivator, and also because it would undermine our medical system. We have a system in place in which people are able to receive donations, right? You can do a directed donation if you want, or we have a donor bank, and we match people who are the best candidates, right? And some people don't like that because it seems like the man is kind of deciding who lives and dies. But the alternative is way worse. Like if anybody is allowed to sell their organs, you might have someone who is like gonna die in 5 hours who doesn't get a kidney because somebody who's having whose kidney is failing but has weeks or months to live pays for it. And our medical system has this, and our laws have determined that that is not okay.
So, okay, there are so many ways. I see. All right, we'll go to Jack and then 2B afterwards. But there are just so many ways you can take this. Like, talking about self-harm. I mean, Adam said, there are so many ways of self-harm that we do allow in our society, right? Things that we wouldn't outlaw. This is the example that came to my head, and take it where you want. But there's a new Jackass movie coming, right? You remember the guys from Jackass making money
Unfortunately.
off of sometimes extreme self-harm, right? But should that be illegal? Like, is it illegal to allow someone to kick you in the balls? Some people do that. Some people pay
is it
others.
permanent though?
I mean, it
Like,
can be.
is that permanent harm? It can lead to, but we know for a fact that certain actions do.
What about?
Whereas certain just have a possibility.
Well,
And there's a difference.
what
Yeah.
about the example Pathos gave before, which was I thought was really interesting, in terms of a woman allowing herself to be used as the what's the term? You know,
This is surrogate.
Surrogate. Thank you. Surrogate. Yes. To become a surrogate, right? The pregnancy does trauma to the body, right? We know that. It does a trauma. For most people, it's a irrecoverable trauma, but for others, like
It can also be deadly.
It can be deadly. Like women die in pregnancy, but we allow them to do that. They're playing roulette with their lives, right?
But there's a distinct difference between that and something we know. It's not just a chance, not just a possibility, but we know. Like if someone wanted to get their eyeballs removed, I know it's an extreme, absurd thing. If they wanted to sell their eyeballs and remove their eyeballs, we know for a fact that that's not recoverable. You can't recover from that.
Neither is giving away a kidney, right? So
What about giving away your eggs? Like
giving
Pathos said,
that
away
stuff
your eggs.
away, we value that as a society because it does a lot of good. We're saving a life, and self-sacrifice is something that, as a society, that we condone. You know, to put our lives on the line, to be a soldier, to do all these, to run into the burning building to save a life. That's okay. And
I think to promote life is what we're looking at.
Yeah, but
to make more life.
But
what society's trying to do.
But you're drawing a distinction here, and this is the same distinction that many other people do. So it's not just Wick. But you're drawing a distinction here in terms of like money, right? So like, what difference does it make? Like for a firefighter, is the firefighter any less heroic that they get paid to do their job, right? Than a random person going in and saving an individual from a fire, right? There's a chance of equal harm, assuming the firefighter should be like trained and equipped, but just still equal harm, right? But is the firefighter less heroic for that? If I am selling my kidneys rather than simply donating my kidneys, right? Is the person who receives it any less dead, right? Right?
I understand, but it's not less heroic.
It just comes down to what we want to incentivize.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's what we want to incentivize. And yes, it's not less heroic for the firefighter who gets paid, but there is something that we as society value when you have no expectation, when no one expects you to do something, and yet you do it anyway. We can see that good, right or wrong. This is how society functions, right?
Yeah, Wick. I just don't. I think so. You draw this like really hard line when you like talk about it at like and like there should be like no self-harm like or bodily harm or like
again
any type of harm,
it should be either eliminated. We should really examine them. Like I wouldn't say in all cases. I wouldn't. This isn't an absolute statement. I'm not making a blanket statement, but I am saying that this is where we should start to really be concerned and take notice and really drill down and look and as a society and as a legal system say, okay, we want to allow this, we don't allow this. Where before that line, I'm more open. Like I don't think the government has any say in whether you should donate your blood or something like that. I just
Yeah. So like the only thing I want to say,
No, finish your point, and then I will
is
go
like
to Jack.
is that like so like that's like you've kind of retreated from where you originally were, and I'm not trying to like be like call you out like our tactics or anything.
Just
but,
to
like,
be clear, I'm learning as we go. This isn't like some, you know,
yeah,
it's okay for me to change my positions
yeah.
because
So all I'm gonna say, just to say, like, it's I understand like you changed your position, but I want to recognize that like we're moving from like that like all things that harm yourself are okay to like we have to like make those calculations, right? Those good versus bad calculations, those how much harm, the permanent harm, and these are questions that have been considered. And then like what someone like me would say, and somebody else on like maybe Pathos would agree with, is that there are a lot of areas where the government has made this decision before us, and the decision they have made is not necessarily the correct one, and that we should be able to explore that
sure, yeah.
going forward.
Let's go to Jack and then 2B.
Okay, so there's been a lot of stuff that's been brought up so far. And Prime, I thought that was a really good point about like the relationship between self-harm and hard labor, because that is something that, you know, it's not just related to like the movie Jackass, but we could relate it to literally any field of like construction or mining or any of these fields that involve putting your body on the line and taking some degree of risk when you are on the job, right? And when we're talking about that, that then connects with like the homelessness example that Pathos brought up earlier, except with a little bit of a twist, right? Like, what about the bodily autonomy of the homeless person? And when we're talking about like the autonomy and freedoms of people in our current society and the society that we want to build and the legal system of that society, we do need to take into account the fact that we live under a society where there are corporations with trillions of dollars, billions of dollars at their disposal that are able and willing to shape our legal system for their own benefits, right? So it's not just like the moral concerns undergirding our legal system, it's also the moneyed concerns undergirding our legal system that determines what we can and cannot do. Like, for example, one of the big reasons marijuana was originally outlawed was because it posed a threat to the way like ropes were made way back in the day. When we're talking about these issues, there are a lot of things that undergird what we perceive as the moral justification that aren't necessarily that are kind of arbitrary, right? And we shouldn't be taking them as absolutes. And when we're talking about things like sex work, for example, I would argue that sex work is largely just as exploitative a field of to work in as someone who is going into the mines every day. You know, both are performing labor, both should be able to ply their trades because they have the same rights over their own body and how they use it as anyone else should. And so in our current capitalist paradigm, everyone experiences this same amount of exploitation for, you know, needing to get a job, and you experience that exploitation because you know if you don't work, you're going to be that homeless person in Pathos's example. So when we are talking about bodily autonomy, for me, it ultimately comes down to I believe you should experience the maximum amount of like bodily autonomy possible, as long as it's not infringing on anyone else's bodily autonomy, right? I think that this is really the line that we have to go with when we're talking about this issue. And I think that there are just additional concerns on top of that that make the issue much more complicated. The more involved in society we get. And I think that this is a question or a topic that goes in so many different directions because frankly society goes in so many different directions and the question changes depending on the society you're in. For example, Wick, you brought up like gouging out your eyes, right? Well, I mean, it's not inconceivable that that could be like a religious practice, right?
Mhm.
Like there are plenty of cultures around the world that have engaged in like scarification rituals that permanently leave their bodies changed.
Circumcision.
Circumcision
Yeah.
is another one.
Sorry.
And the thing.
And to be clear, that's usually not a choice that the person
Right.
makes.
Well, so the thing is, I believe that you have 100%, if you're an adult and you are able to willingly make this decision, you should be able to undergo a scarification ritual. You should be able to undergo circumcision. If you're a kid, you're not able to make those decisions, shouldn't be undergoing those things.
I have to challenge that because now
Yeah.
this is going to get really dicey. So
Yeah.
here's
Oh
trigger
yeah.
warning.
I know.
And I don't want to ignore Two Boys' response, but I want to interject for just a moment. How would you apply what you just said to abortion?
To abortion?
You beat me to it. You beat me to it. Go ahead.
Yeah. Absolutely. So here's my take on abortion, okay? It would be unethical for someone to strap you down, right? Like the government comes and straps you down onto like a surgical table and like grafts you into someone who just got hit by a car, right? And you are now like it is you are connected to this person. If you disconnect yourself, that other person dies, okay? I would view that as something incredibly unethical and incredibly awful, especially when you throw in the possibility that it's A, going to permanently change your body, and B, possibly might result in your death, right? So when we're taking all of these factors into consideration, I think even if you treated a fetus as a completely fully born human that is completely an adult, I would still view it as very, very a very huge infringement on your bodily autonomy to force people to do that with the power of the state.
Wait,
Now,
I totally want to fight back against that, okay? Because there's a big difference. I mean, this is like massive difference between like waking up and the state like connecting another body to you and making you like incubate for them or keep them alive, and like someone who makes, I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but like just want to make it very clear it's different than like you, right, making the choice to connect yourself to somebody else's body and then breaking that connection. These are like two very different things.
I don't think so. I think you are entirely within your own right to cut that connection whenever you so choose.
The part that I was interested in is when you brought up the situation of a child not having the choice to be circumcised. To what degree does a fetus have in choosing to be aborted?
Oh, I do not believe that the fetus has any inherent right. When we're talking about this, if a woman doesn't want that fetus in their body, they are entirely justified in cutting the connection.
Is there a line in which that changes, though? Is there a line in which you say that the fetus does have a right?
Sure. When the fetus is no longer a fetus and can survive independently from the mother.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so I just want to kind of
quietly back out of the conversation.
I just want to kind of drill down here. Like the reason that abortion, the fetus, for example, wouldn't have a say, is because the woman is undergoing a change, a physiological change in her body. We talked about this earlier, how pregnancy can really mess up the body, and so because of bodily autonomy, because it directly affects them, the mother has the right and the choice to put a stop to that happening, to saying, I don't want to go through this. I don't want to do this. And so ethically, we should allow that to happen because it is the woman's body that is going through this, and that supersedes the rights of the fetus in this case, in my opinion.
So to drill down just for a moment, but we all agree that there is a point in time in which if there's a viable fetus, that no longer that fetus becomes an autonomous being itself, whether or not it's aware of its autonomy. In as much as someone who, if I were to be struck in the head by a wayward rock or a bullet,
I understand,
and lost my sentience, I would still have my sapience, right?
But I am not. I'm not
for a fetus.
I'm not here to give you like a direct answer of when that happens because I don't know. I'm gonna be very honest.
That's why we're talking
about something
it,
I know. So it's not a decision I need to make. It's not a decision I should make.
By the way, should the woman be the only one who gets to choose when?
Yes.
Right? No, no.
That gets really fucking.
No. But like, I'm just trying to explore this. Obviously, you know, I'm pro-choice, right? So, right. Put
Let's
that
not
up.
forget, Two Boy has something to say. Like, in a
Yeah,
half
yeah,
an
I know.
Oh,
I
sorry,
haven't
sorry.
forgotten. Um, is she the only, like, okay? So where I'm taking this is that, you know, if someone else somehow aborts that person's baby, right? Like through drugs or something, right? Against her will. Like, is the harm still equal? Right? Is the harm, if a woman is doing a harm during an abortion, right? Or maybe you don't think that, but if she's doing a harm and when she chooses to get rid of that child, is it the same harm when someone else does that?
No.
No. Why not?
No, like first off, these are two completely different impositions on bodily autonomy.
Hmm.
I would this is why I started off with my hypothetical of, like, even if you, like, hypothetically we lived in a world where women give birth to fully formed adults from their uteruses, right? I still would think it'd be ethically and morally justifiable to like have abortions, right? As a function of bodily autonomy. And so I think, though, that if somebody is imposing upon a woman or someone who's carrying a fetus an abortion that they do not want, that is also a horrific violation of their bodily autonomy.
No, I get that. I'm just saying, is the harm equal in both those cases, right? So both cases, a life is being lost, right? And we are saying that that life is not equal, at least not on equal standing, moral standing, as the woman's in her body. Now, someone else is simply making that decision that that child should die. I'm not sure. Maybe this question is even worth digging into. I'm not sure, but like, do you understand what I'm going with this? Like, it's the same choice is being made, right? And a harm is being done.
Yeah, but it's also violating the bodily autonomy of the woman in order to enforce that choice onto her.
Okay.
Yeah, so in this hypothetical, would it be something like, for example, the doctors know that if the woman carries it to term, the woman will die. However, who gets to make that choice? I think the woman in every case. Like, the woman
That's
has a right to make that.
Yeah, that's a good example, actually. Yeah, that's actually a really good example. If
I have them on the table.
But yeah, so like the woman might die, and she's deciding to go through it with anyway, but her family says, no, we want you alive, we value you, and we want her to go through this abortion. Like, is like the harm equal there?
I don't know about the harm equal,
I mean,
but
equal.
again, I'm going to go back to my position here. Is the
moral?
woman's at risk, the woman who is at risk, and is the woman who gets to make that decision.
Let's go to 2B.
Yeah, I don't know. Just hearing you guys talk about this stuff, it just makes me think about when I was reading through the philosophy of all of this, and there's different ways, there's different models that philosophers have for how we establish what's important. Because I think we're actually getting to the heart of this, which is that it's really not about freedoms, because I think freedoms follow when we come up with a good argument for like autonomy. And so I think what we're running into is just a problem with this philosophy that we have, because there's competency conditions and then there's authenticity conditions. And then competency conditions are various capacities for rational thought, self-control, and freedom from debilitating pathologies and systemic self-deception. And then authenticity conditions are the capacity to reflect upon and endorse or identify with one's desires, values, and so on. And so I think what we're running into here is a problem with how we're weighting things. I think we have different weighting systems, like whether we place more, and I think we're adding a third category onto this, because I don't think necessarily the outcome, whether the woman lives from the pregnancy or whether the baby dies or anything, I don't think any of that is necessarily getting at autonomy anymore, unless we add that to this category of, like, now we have health conditions, like the health outcomes of these people. I think that consideration is actually outside of the considerations of autonomy, at least as I've seen it.
I don't think it is, though. To be like, we can take this off abortion too. Like, if you have a disease that is crippling you, that has a permanent disfigurement to you, and there is an experimental procedure out that doctors have discovered that has a high risk of death, that if you go through it, there's like a coin flip, let's say a 50-50 that you will die if you take this. The only person who should be able to decide that if you try this, if you risk this to get rid of whatever problem or ailment you are having, is the person suffering the ailment, the person going through the procedure. I think in that case, it's very clear.
Yeah,
Now
but
you could argue that there are other actors who have an interest, a vested interest in whether you go through this procedure. If you have family, if you have children, if you have people who rely on you. And even in those cases, I think the gravity here lies on the individual that is suffering with the condition and taking the risk. I think
sure,
that's
but I don't
where.
think sure, but I don't think that third thing you're throwing in there of like health at all is about autonomy anymore. I think I make it whether I'm making that choice because my family is influencing me to make that choice. Now you're talking about my autonomy. Whether you co-sign off of that because you're throwing in this, whether I should have the freedom to do that based off of your judgment of whether I'm likely to survive from that or not. Now you're talking about a freedom thing. You're not talking about autonomy anymore. If autonomy is just I'm of rational mind. I have the capability to make this choice. I'm making this choice of my own volition, and I have the competence of mind to self-reflect on whether I actually feel like that volition is of my own. It's not just I'm making this choice because of societal distortion of my beliefs about what I should do. So I think that third thing that people are throwing in there, that health, it's not about autonomy anymore at that point. Like that's not an argument against autonomy. Now you're making an argument against people's freedoms to be able, whether they should be free to do that thing. But that's not at all talking about their autonomy to do so.
I kind of see them as interwoven, to be honest with you, because I make decisions about my children's bodies that directly relate to their health, that, if I'm hearing you right, could infringe upon their liberty and freedom. And that's just in a simple case of getting them vaccinated for measles, polio, and all the above. I'm making decisions that directly affect their biological beings, but that is interwoven with their health, that affects their liberty. So I guess for me, I know we keep throwing around this word of, everyone has like this sound mind, but when does that occur and at what age and when and how and who?
Wait,
Right?
but
Like,
so these are things you've
default to-
determined in the government, right? So like,
Right.
for
Through our
one,
legal system.
like when you make decisions for your children, it's because like as to be put out, like you're violating what we would call like competency. Children, we don't see children as competent. They're not able to see like the long-term ramifications of their short-term actions, and therefore we assign caretakers to children, and sometimes adults who can't do this. And we allow you to violate both the freedom and we allow you to violate the autonomy and the freedom of your children, because we deem that they don't have the ability to do it themselves.
Yeah,
so
and
it's-
I was just
Go
to
ahead.
say, yeah, and I think Pathos, you know that that's violating their autonomy. Like the fact that you're allowed to make choices for them and that you can greatly influence their ability to come to sound decisions, whether they have the capacity to or not. Of course, you're taking over for their autonomy. And even beyond the point where they can make sound decisions while they're still in your house and you're still the main provider, the main source of their health insurance and all that stuff, of course, you're robbing them of their autonomy.
Do you
Now,
think
if
that's
you're
bad though? Are
no, I'm
you
not saying
against
it's
that
bad.
view?
I'm just
Okay.
saying that is the thing that's actually an affront to their autonomy, not the fact that you're making that decision because of their health. If that's the thing that's motivating you, now that's how your autonomy is being affected. Like whether health and all that stuff factors into your considerations of whether you're doing it. That's how your autonomy is being affected. You're affecting their autonomy because you're deciding what is the best course of action for them. And now the state is also giving you the ability to take over for their freedoms and say like, no, this is my child. They're going to do X, Y, Z because I'm their parent.
Wait, to be
So
clear,
for those of
when you you can say it's violating a child's autonomy, right? But like if we were to allow children to make decisions on vaccinations, right? that decision that a child would make independent of their parents would also not be autonomous because they would not be competent to make an autonomous decision, right? So when we assign a caretaker to a child, they are making a autonomous decision representing said child because the child could not make an autonomous decision themselves either.
Hey,
it's not that we're violating children's autonomy, is that children, we
do you
deem them as
do you
not
agree
being
with
able to
that?
No,
have
I don't. I
autonomy
disagree
in this
here.
case.
No.
Go ahead,
So-
Jack.
I
so-
think that's the case beyond a certain point. I mean, before a certain point, the child, when they're not capable of making rational decisions, because a baby is not, they're not mentally capable of making rational decisions. I think there's a threshold in your development that you go beyond where you are capable of making rational decisions.
Yeah,
You are
but,
capable of
but
thinking.
legally we have to draw lines, right? So like, the
Yeah, no,
line
I agree.
So no, I would argue, no, yeah, we are 100% violating children's autonomy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing, right? Like, for example,
Agreed.
like George Washington famously violated the bodily autonomy of his soldiers by inoculating them, forcing them to inoculate against smallpox, right? Like, they couldn't make decisions about what they wanted to do with their own bodies. They were forced to inoculate against smallpox. I think that there are times in which, you get good outcomes from violating bodily autonomy.
in which we can violate bodily autonomy of adults as well. But the violation of an adult, the autonomy of an adult and the autonomy of a child are two separate issues.
Right. I just
Right?
want to make
And-
sure that we are. I just want to make sure that we are acknowledging that. Yeah, that this is a violation of bodily autonomy, and we should be able to
But
acknowledge
it's
that while
not,
still having the
because-
conversation.
Because
Yeah,
if a child cannot make an autonomous decision, because like you have to be competent, right? Ability to see like the long-term ramifications of your actions to make an autonomous decision.
So, but
right? If you cannot do that, you cannot make an autonomous decision. So you therefore, like, someone can't violate an autonomous decision that you cannot make.
So, hold on.
But however, I have a
really
question.
wanna-
There's a difference between exerting like social autonomy and also bodily autonomy. Bodily autonomy is something you have once you're an independent being. Like, we recognize that, right?
Sorry, say it again.
necessarily.
Could you say it again,
Like-
please?
Like, you have a right to bodily autonomy.
No,
As
I
soon as you're an
absolutely
independent
disagree
being.
with this.
Mm,
Yeah,
So that so
What do you mean by
therefore,
independent
children,
being?
right?
Like, what does that
Therefore,
mean?
Look,
Independent
if you're
being.
if you're a baby, right, or like you're in preschool, right, and a kid comes up and like I don't know, like slaps you too hard or something, or touches you in a way you don't like, a kid has the ability to say, well, that was an infringement on like my bodily autonomy. You know, you did something that was not okay with me to my body, right? Like, this is why we introduce concepts about like consent, like, oh, you ask before you can hug first, right? That's why we, like, when we're talking about this.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. But
let her finish.
Okay.
So the issue is, you have a right to bodily autonomy, like just a fundamental right to bodily autonomy, and society as a whole, we make laws and social customs around when it's okay to violate that bodily autonomy. Now, we have social customs and laws because we have very good arguments for doing so about violating the bodily autonomy of children when it comes to making decisions on their behalf, because adults are able to critically think better. But that doesn't mean children don't have bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
Well,
But hold on,
but the conversation is
hold on.
okay.
I something I want to get to before we get too far away from it. The Top Dolphin. Like, so I Tubi was getting to this this point, right? About children. Like, you just saying the word children is like deceptive, and I'm guessing I'm hoping you agree with me, right? And that some children should be able to make a choice about like vaccinations, right? I mean, we see this, we see stories about this, how we have dumbass anti-vax parents, and then their kids happen to be smarter, like, I want to get vaxxed, and so they like petition the court to allow them to do so.
What I would say for those children, right? So we sometimes we recognize that, like, so when we assign caretakers to children, we do it in that, like, you gave birth, but not everyone's fit to be a caretaker. So when someone's not fit to be a caretaker, we take away the ability of that caretaker to make a decision. So it's not that the child is making a decision. it's a long-term decision to get vaccinated. It's that the child is petitioning the court that their caretaker is not adequate, and then the court is making the decision that the child can get vaccinated.
Sorry, but that's illegal legally though. But I'm talking about, and conceptually, we understand that those kids can actually understand the long-term consequences of not being vaccinated, and then make that choice for themselves.
It's
right?
possible that that's what they're doing, but you could also if you say with those same so let's say that same child then said that they only wanted to eat chocolate cake for the rest of their life, we would say no, you probably should eat vegetables.
No,
right?
no,
because
I wouldn't say
these
that.
are things that are really important.
So
or
no, you
wait.
Why at 18? So that an 18-year-old, if they decide to take that away, they're not doing age consent. But if the 18-year-old, if they decide they're going to eat chocolate cake for the rest of their lives, that I don't say no, right? And they could have the same level of information that a 16-year-old has, and we're not doing age consent. But I would say sure, whatever, right?
But that's just like the line that we draw, right?
Yeah.
So we can draw an arbitrary line, and so maybe I'll reach a bridge across. Maybe in certain types of decision, long-term ramifications are more clear than other types, and younger children at certain ages can there's certain types of decisions they would probably be able to make, and then as you get older, other decisions, you gain the ability, or it's not like you hit an age and then automatically mentally become completely autonomous in all areas.
Exactly.
However,
but I definitely
we draw a line, right?
Yeah, I mean, legally we do.
16,
right?
Yeah, but I think by the point you're 16, you have the autonomy. You have the capacity of autonomy to make the choice to eat cake for the rest of your life. I don't think that's incumbent upon you
I
being
don't know
18.
if I necessarily agree.
It's a case by case thing, right? It's hard to give
Which is why, there are probably 16-year-olds who don't have the capacity to make that decision.
Well, hold on, wait.
Adults who don't have that.
No. They can. I disagree.
True.
The 16-year-old can come to that decision of rational mind to eat cake every day. That does not mean that they're responsible with that. That doesn't mean that they're not going to go crazy. But because they are irresponsible with that choice, so they maybe become obese or whatever later, that does not mean that they arrived at that choice, the initial choice, irrationally.
So if they weren't able to come to that decision,
people rationally choose to smoke, but it destroys their life.
Wait, you can make rational decisions that aren't autonomous, right?
Okay, explain that.
But so you rational just means that you have some line of no one is perfectly rational. So rational just means that we can give reasons for the things that we do what we do. You can people who voted for Donald Trump were rational, right, in doing so. Now I would say that their rationality is flawed and their logic is flawed, right?
Would you say they're non-autonomous?
Right? No, but
okay.
No, but so a child, right? A 6-year-old can say a rational thing is that I want to have ice cream for dinner because ice cream tastes good, right? That would be a rational decision that they came to, right?
And that's not
ice cream
autonomous?
is good. No, right? Because
okay.
in your definition is that you're able to see the long-term ramifications of your short-term consequences.
No, I don't think that's required.
We're going down a rabbit hole here. I think we should probably bring it back.
It's the competency principle of your autonomy, 100%, as you read it.
It says various capacities for rational thought, self-control, and freedom from debilitating pathologies and systemic self-deception. I don't think a child that's deciding to eat ice cream at the age of 6 is suffering from systemic self-deception or debilitating pathologies, and they exhibit various capacities for rational thought and some amount of self-control. So I think they meet the competency conditions. And also that so maybe the weakest thing you can tackle there is the self-control. But adults don't have self-control. They choose to smoke cigarettes and they go crazy. Mad Lad, we were talking to him the other night and he was talking about this horrible story.
And
but he still has autonomy. So does the 6-year-old.
I mean, but there's difference between giving some governmental autonomy and making an autonomous decision, right?
Oh, by governmental, I think now you're talking about freedom. Do they have freedom?
I guess freedom, the ability to act on said autonomy would be freedom, right?
Yeah.
Again, whether or not we're violating the autonomy here, I think there's a big interest in allowing a child's autonomy to be violated because, again, children do not understand. So we can recognize that, yes, it's a violation for a child's autonomy to force them to go to school, to force them to eat correctly, to force them
Go to
to
the dentist.
do all these things, to take a shower. We can recognize that that's okay, and the society benefit for that. That's a reasonable limitation to bodily autonomy that we can say. I
So,
think all of us can say we're okay with, right?
so okay.
I mean, I don't agree, but okay.
Wait, say that
You
again,
don't agree
Wood?
with that?
Wait, say that again.
No, I
Wood?
don't.
You do not think that it's okay to force a child to take a shower, to
No, I
force
think
a
it's
child
okay.
to eat
I just
correctly,
don't think
to
you're
force
violating
a,
such child's autonomy.
you directly are. You're forcing
I
them to do
don't-
something they do not want to
maybe-
do.
Yeah,
If I'm someone who has children, I'm directly violating my child's autonomy by mandating the things that they do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
good. That's
Yeah,
okay.
that
That's,
is.
there's
That's
a
the
lot of
role
benefit
of-
to that.
Two brains and
if I decide to cover Adam in tar just for funsies, right? I think I would be violating your autonomy if you're not into that thing, right? Maybe you should give it a try. I don't know. You might like it, but like, it's just.
yeah.
But I do want to ask another question though, because I'm unfortunately friends with Doobie, and he comes in chat like a fucking hurricane, and he says something terrible, but like he usually does. He says that he talks about gay conversion therapy and how that's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, great. So relating that to this, we have banned gay conversion therapy in many localities. It's banned. Should it be? Is that not
okay.
as autonomy, right? If I want to go through that conversion as an adult, right, should not be able to go through it. Now, the reasoning people have said to ban it is they liken it to torture, right? Because you're forcing people to deny themselves, deny their true selves as LGBT individual, and try to convert to cishet. And the process is frankly terrible. But should I not have the right to, even if that is self-harm, should I not have the right to self-harm?
Well, would you think it's okay for someone to legally sell, like for someone to decide that I'm going to sell myself into slavery? Would you allow that as a full consenting adult? I would think no, correct?
I mean, we necessarily do, right?
Yeah, I mean,
What's the connection between
depending.
slavery
If I wanted
and
to-
conversion?
Well, no.
Wage slave.
What I'm saying is that we don't allow people to do things we know will harm them. You know, and in extreme
Not
cases
true.
like that. Like not all cases. Obviously, I know I'm saying it as a blanket statement, but I'm not meaning it as a blanket statement. I recognize that there are exceptions, but we as a society do not allow certain things, even though it violates someone's autonomy, because we know that it for all sorts of reasons, but we know it causes harm. Like we don't allow people to sell themselves into slavery for a wide variety of good. When it comes to gay conversion therapy,
right?
when we go to gay conversion therapy, I think that we outlaw that, and I think that's a good thing to outlaw. Though,
Wait,
for the exact reason.
we outlaw gay conversion therapy because, like, as a medical practice, it's not it's not like what's the word, like there's no efficacy. It doesn't produce like good results.
Efficacy?
However, but yeah, efficacy, I think is the word. I don't know, but which is like, but like necessarily, right? If my like brother, like let's say I'm gay and my brother wanted to, and I wanted to go through gay conversion therapy, and my brother wanted to study up on it and do it to me, the government wouldn't necessarily infringe, right? We don't allow like the like the creation of like entities that that charge for conversion therapy, right? But like necessary, and like the same goes for slavery. I could necessarily like enter like a slavery agreement with another human being, right? If I do so.
You're
There's no
right?
slave institutions anymore, so it doesn't. The point kind of falls apart there.
Yeah, I guess like the law, like in terms of slavery, I can never remove my legal rights, right? And like give, well, actually, but
You can
for the most part, you can never remove.
yeah, you
like,
can.
your personhood,
totally
right?
can.
You like in the eyes of the law, right? you can never take away your own personhood.
But you can take
I
away.
guess that's a decision.
But you can take away
But you
your
can take away
ability to
basically all
give
the rights that you have. Yeah.
Yeah, you could take away your ability to give decisions. Like you can give was it power of attorney to someone else, and they can make you make
Join a cult.
decisions for you.
Yeah. So so what I would say about slavery is like, I guess technically if your version of slavery is like not having personhood, then sure. But like you could live a life that is, you could, if you wanted to, you could technically, if you find another person to do it, live a life that is near identical to that of a slave in like
I understand, but when I talk about
the
this,
1800s or whatever.
as Pathos said, we do not allow institutions. We do not allow institutions to be created where people can voluntarily sell themselves into slavery, and we do that for a very good reason.
Yeah, because it would be coercive, right? But your problem with that isn't the harm being done. Like,
No, it's the harm being done too. I have a problem with that.
Oh yeah, you might have, but the problem when it serves autonomy isn't the harm being done. It's the fact that you cannot make a decision to make that.
I'm gonna go to Pathos, 2B, and Jack. I just wanted to say though, like I don't think that like slavery, even though I think it's a good topic for this, I don't think that's necessarily like the best correlation, right? Like in terms of against like self-harm, right? Like there's some people who definitely enjoy pain and many exotic forms, and they will pay to do that, to receive that kind of pain. So
can I
like
just do a short clarification on this issue? Okay,
short clarification, then we go to Pathos.
Okay. First off, most of the states that have banned conversion therapy have only banned like state and federal funding of conversion therapy, specifically for minors. And when we're talking about like places that have banned it outright, it's usually just for like adults who are under like guardianships. So like if you're a adult, you want to go to gay conversion therapy, guess what? You can in the United States. There's just not federal funding for most of it. Because it has no proven efficacy, which that seems pretty reasonable for me.
Fair enough. All right, Pathos, and then 2B.
And just to RiverboatJack's point of view, like that's actually the best outcome for the government, to say that we are not going to limit, we're not going to say you can't, but we're not going to fund the mechanisms that allow this. Because the government is taking a neutral position in that state. They're saying that we're ceding the choice to the individual to decide what they want to do with themselves. We aren't going to allocate the taxpayers' pot of gold towards this endeavor. So
in states where it's not outlawed, then like I would say it's not. I would say it's not ideal in states where it's not outlawed, because then you probably still send children there, and that's not okay. So there's probably some work that needs to be done there. But I get what you're saying.
But yeah, and like I said, like the whole point of the conversation is, at what point does the government get to say, you don't get to make these decisions with your bodies? And the things that the government makes that statement on are things that either harm the societal goal they're trying to reach, or it's either, like you said, either it's a law or it's a limit to a freedom. So yeah, I think, just like I'm saying back to what RiverboatJack was saying, that yeah, the government says we're not going to fund it, but if you want to do it, you can do it. Just like going to the casino, right? That's a bodily autonomous thing. Like you can decide, I'm going to blow my 401k and ruin my family, ruin my whole life and everything under me by making this bodily autonomous decision to go into the casino.
There's no law against some states make gambling illegal, do they not?
Some states do, right? Yeah. And like I said, like and so once again, I'm talking about laws and legality. I'm talking about the base agreement, the common denominator that we all could agree on, and then we build our ethics on that bottom tier of that pyramid.
Okay, 2B?
Yeah, I think for me, the only thing I would really find, because I don't think we need to go to slavery and all that stuff. I think it seems kind of inconsistent to me with Dewey needs to qualify that more, because the whole, it seems like the same criticism that he would throw against pornography and why people engage with that would apply to gay conversion therapy. That there are societal factors that are causing people to engage in that stuff against their will, which I think is not controversial to say. The fact that some people grow up in religious families, some people just grow up around people who don't like gay people. and they don't want to have to deal with that. And so those factors push them to engage with that kind of treatment or whatever. And so I don't understand why the argument against the autonomy of people to do that, just like the argument against the autonomy of people to engage or women to engage with pornography because of patriarchy, why that is not upheld in this scenario. So I think I would need more fleshing out of why he thinks that should be the case, because now it seems like he should be for people's engagement with pornography.
You should be.
People should be able to.
I'm not believing I can make his argument.
But okay, yeah. If you have anything else to add, Jack, because you were in line before, but
No, I'm good. I just wanted to make that clarification real quick.
okay. Yeah, all right, we don't have to go any further down on the gay conversion therapy thing road. But there's so many other places we can take this. So when I wrote this question, it was like, should society allow these things, right? And it's down to what Pathos has said before. Again, thank you, Pathos, talking about like what we want out of our citizenry, right? Like of our people, like what do we want to accomplish, right? And so if you're giving people total bodily autonomy, assuming it doesn't infringe on the rights of others, right? But total bodily autonomy, then you're going to increase the number of deaths, right? Even keeping suicide aside, right? If people can just do whatever they want, then you're necessarily increasing the number of deaths. So should we limit people's bodily autonomy simply so society gets to keep them around, keep them safe, right? Should that be a concern of society to keep people safe from themselves?
Yeah. Is the safety of the citizenry is definitely within the purview of the state. The what we're discussing is where the limits are.
Yeah.
I think I would draw the line in a different place than Riverboat Jack, but we would both draw a line somewhere.
Yeah, I guess like I kind of see what Prime's saying in that like a lot of the like kind of start there, but every time we like go to talk about that, like someone goes off and like makes the discussion about someone else committing harm against another autonomous agent, right? Or violating the autonomy of someone else. So like we talk about like, oh, are people able to do like something to themselves? Like for example, necessarily, and like Jack would disagree with me, but necessarily like abortion, right? And then like you would say, and then we would bring up the example, oh well, there's like another being, right? And then we like went down the road of children. When in actual, and like the argument is whether or not that would be another autonomous agent when you get to like the abortion thing. But I don't want to go down that route. I want to go back to like the idea that like should a person, like assuming they're harming no one else, be able to make an autonomous decision to harm themselves? Like that would be like in my like I guess the way I see it is that's probably the like the big question in terms of like determining whether or not like we should give bodily autonomy to citizens, right?
The thing that's drawing out to me, I think it's a big thing, is that I think in our society we have a more individualistic twist to the way we run our culture. In actuality, we do have interdependency. The decisions that either of us make do not occur in a vacuum. They all have a cause and effect. Even in the cereal that I buy, the paper that I choose to write on, right? It may be, there's a spectrum of that cause and effect, but we don't live in a vacuum. So I don't think we can remove the interdependency that we actually experience as a human being. For example, a really big, blunt example of this is I make the decision to blow past a yellow light that's turning red, my bodily autonomy. That decision may change and affect all the other drivers around me. It may result in an accident. It may result in other people being delayed, but it's not a decision that I make in a vacuum. And I think that when we talk about autonomy, it's tricky because we're trying to balance where does autonomy begin versus how are my personal decisions affecting everyone else that is in my community.
One of the things that we also have to keep in mind is that certain decisions we make, and you're exactly right, Nothing. No man is an island, as they say. We don't exist in a vacuum. There are certain decisions you can make to self-harm that will create a drain of resources. That does, if you choose to blind yourself, someone has to take care of you. Someone has to help you. It's not just, you aren't just losing your sight. There's knockoff effects. There's other like ripples from that stone you threw in the pond, that we have to take into account, and that the state needs to. If the state, like a lot of cities ban soda and things like that because they know it creates a drain on the healthcare system, that it creates these drains on these public resources. And I think that the state has a interest in keeping that in mind. Like when we allow what autonomy is allowed and when it is violated. And I think that's something that we'd have to keep in mind when it comes to where does the state ethically and morally have the right to go in and say, no, stop, don't do that.
So I think we're not really engaging with the idea of bodily autonomy anymore. It seems like we've definitely branched off of that into like societal autonomy to a degree.
Like, it's just freedom.
Like
They're
when we're
about
talking
freedom now.
when we're talking about like bodily autonomy, what we're talking about is like the state can't come in and be like, you have to give us your blood, you have to give us your organs, you have to give us your tissue, like that. When we're talking about bodily autonomy, that's the kind of stuff we're talking about, not necessarily like the responsibility of society to take care of you if you like purposely blind yourself. Like I don't know, like people
Wait, can I
No, but those things are related. Yeah.
Of course they're related.
Well, yeah, of course they're related. Yeah, they're
absolutely.
I think they're under the
absolutely
same umbrella, though. But
they're absolutely related. It's just that we've moved on to something that's just related to bodily autonomy.
But
I just want to make sure that's clear.
But it's not clear. I just want to push back against it. It's not clear at all, because what we're talking about is when society, or the state in this case, gets the chance to stop you from doing something. Because bodily autonomy isn't just what you allow to be done to you, it's what you choose to do to yourself. These are both bodily autonomy. And when you choose to do something to yourself, the state has a right in certain cases to come in and say no.
Right.
A big line is kids. We allow
again, when we're talking about this, like, we respect the bodily autonomy of fucking dead people. Like, we're like, if you sign that little box on your card that you don't want to donate your organs, we'll just throw them in the garbage. Like, what? Like,
certainly, and that's a legal thing.
Exactly.
That's a different question.
But again,
like, you're getting stuck on this legality. You're getting really stuck on this legality.
I'm not stuck on the legality. I'm talking about bodily autonomy, and you're talking about the ramifications of having that bodily autonomy. These are two different questions.
Like, they're not, though. What directly
so do you think the state should be able to appropriate people's organs for the greater good? That's a question of bodily autonomy.
Good question, and I don't know.
Let the government take dead people's organs and give them to people.
Or should the state be able to be allowed to take organs? On the other side of that, should the state be allowed to take care of individuals who can't take care of themselves? Right. This is all bodily autonomy. Right, like, and what this?
You're trying to make into this super narrow thing when it's
the question. The question is whether or not people should have to what degree people have bodily autonomy. And if we're talking about the state taking care of people, that's a question that does directly revolve around the issue of bodily autonomy. But again, we used to live in a state where people were property. People were commodified as property, and so like when we're talking about
what does allow me to you? That's why that's where we're getting stuck on. What does allow me to you? Who is allowing what?
Well, I would argue everyone has a right to fundamental bodily autonomy. That's a fundamental human right, regardless of the society you happen to live in. This is one of the reasons why we view like rape as one of the worst crimes someone can commit. Right? Rape and murder. You're taking away someone's bodily autonomy in incredibly intimate and irreversible ways. And so when we're talking about this, of course, then the issue of rape and like we're gonna start talking about the issue of rape and murder, or we're gonna talk about like issues regarding to like self-harm. We're gonna we definitely don't have to. I'm just saying that like the issue of rape does touch on bodily autonomy, but that's not a conversation about bodily autonomy, if that makes sense.
Can people ever lose bodily autonomy?
I think that in
Okay.
I think that the degree to which the society you live in affects the degree to which bodily autonomy is respected. But I think there is a fundamental on a human level, all societies take into account bodily autonomy.
Does
Thomas
your
Jefferson wrote about this as one of the fundamental building blocks of democracy. Like it's been in there for hundreds of years, and you can even find it farther back than that. So
does bodily autonomy require that you can like think and that you're not a vegetable though, or does it like regardless of whether you're a vegetable or not, that we just respect that you're a living body?
bodily autonomy means a person has control over who or what uses their body for what and for how long. Like that's the fundamental issue. Somebody fundamentally should not be able to come up to you and be like, I need 10 pints of your blood. Give it to me now at the end
What
of a gun.
about what about people who make decisions for their family members about whether they want to stay on life support because they're like a vegetable?
Yeah, exactly. Those are issues we can talk about. Directly related to bodily autonomy. Did
But do
somebody
you view
leave
that
a
as
living will?
right? But did you think does that person in that instance, the vegetable, did they have bodily autonomy or are they a carrot?
They are. Are they a carrot? I would largely say that there is some degree of human bodily autonomy where like doctors can't just be like, well, you're brain dead, we're gonna start taking your organs out now. Right?
Yeah, but
like
wait, you
family,
can't
But
do
even
that.
your
family,
family, not the
Wait, but
doctor, the
you
next
can't
of
do
kin,
that
your
as long as
family.
the
and
well, no, you can't do that as long as the person, right, who is brain dead, didn't give you permission, right?
right.
So like when
Well,
they were
what if they
alive.
didn't
So
make a
they
will
make the
though,
decision.
or what if they
Yeah.
didn't have a
So
will or anything like that?
what we
You're the only
what we
person.
do
You're the
is
next
we
of
give
kin.
like like what is I think like medical power of attorney or something like that, or like or there's another word for it. But we give someone the responsibility to make that decision for you if you didn't make that clear, right?
Hmm.
And we
Yeah, but is
usually
that a violation of the carrot's bodily autonomy?
I mean,
the
the
carrots
fact that you're referring to someone as a carrot might, I don't know,
Asparagus, watermelon.
kind of weighs the question, don't you think?
Uh,
necessarily
though.
maybe, but like I guess like you can say it violates their bodily autonomy, but we're unable to act in a way that doesn't violate their bodily autonomy because we have no idea what their choices would be, right? Like they don't
I'm
have the
just
ability to exercise, so maybe not. Like I guess I would say maybe not because they don't have the ability to exercise their bodily autonomy, right?
right.
Then
So things don't
we
always
designate
have
that to somebody
bodily
else.
right, but then now see how what if that applies to like a newborn baby because they don't have a rational mind and all that, right? They're closer to someone who's like a carrot or like asparagus. So
It's fair, Canada, it's fair. I mean,
yeah, so they don't.
you guys
Not
didn't
a
like
kid.
it, but I'm the one who said that like we don't give children bodily autonomy, right? Like
I mean,
we don't
No, I
allow
didn't say
children
you
to
get. I
govern their
said
own body.
well, I'm
I'm
talking
saying
about a
I'm the one
newborn.
who
I
said
think you
that,
do give
right?
children autonomy.
Right?
No,
Newborn children all the same thing, okay? We don't. I don't think
no,
it's
they're
a
not.
violation because they don't have the ability, right? Like
A
Obviously,
now,
six-year-old
obviously we give
child, a
some
6-year-old child has
autonomy.
more autonomy than a newborn,
Yeah,
obviously.
but
yeah,
to be
I love you
obviously,
guys, but come
obviously
on.
right?
you wouldn't
But not.
give full autonomy, right? You
Wait,
wouldn't give the same autonomy to a 6-year-old as you would a full-grown adult, would you?
Wait, I couldn't hear you. Sorry, say that again.
Oh, you wouldn't give the same amount of autonomy to a 6-year-old as you would a full-grown adult, would you?
Oh no, they don't
Of
have
course.
the
Okay,
same
that's I'm
autonomy.
just clarifying here because
yeah, and I don't even know legally. I don't even know if that's true. I don't know if like a 6-year-old or a newborn relatively have like any difference of their ability to enact with like the legal system.
They
And the
do.
only reason
They
I use the
do.
legal system because it's like downstream from like.
It doesn't have to be the legal system. It could be literally, I want to make a decision. I'm of rational
No,
thought,
no,
so I can make a
I
decision.
get
So,
what you're saying. I'm just
so
using the legal system as like a
here,
proxy for like morality, kind of.
here's like an example I would give, right? I would argue that doing circumcisions or like surgeries on intersex people who are born, they're newborns. You do a non-consensual operation that could be put off until they're an adult. I would argue that that is a violation of their bodily autonomy in a way that I think is somewhat unacceptable on the basis of this. But when we're talking,
I would agree with you.
yeah, and so I want to point out they have the rights of bodily autonomy. We're just like we deem that it is worthwhile to violate those rights for their own good. In some circumstances, not in the case of circumcision or like genital mutilation, obviously.
Let's go to Pathos. Has been dying to get
Yeah.
in.
So I'm closer to agreement with you, Riverboat, than I am disagreement.
Yeah.
I want to preface that, but I do want to say that sometimes when parents have to make these decisions, they are working on a limited amount of information, right? And so when they're making the decision, such as intersex or something like that, the doctors are often saying that we can do it now, and it'll be less harmful because the human being is younger, the skin will heal faster, different factors that are involved with that. So it it's almost a case by case, really unique basis in which all these things are played out on. And I think that back to you, I think you made some really good points about getting back to the conversation about bodily autonomy. And I recognize what you're saying, and that sometimes we get off in these moral tangents about what is right and wrong for the society. But just to go back to that, I have a hard time unraveling those two factors in terms of, you know,
Go ahead.
yeah. So, like for example, my decision to drink whiskey and bourbon 5, 6, 7 nights a week is my personal decision, but when I get into my 60s and 70s, it will have definite objective, effects on society, the healthcare system, and my family. And as we move towards a more progressive, liberal society in which we expect more from our government, it gets really dicey because does the government get to say, well, we've objectively verified that eating red meat is bad for human beings because we are the providers of our healthcare system. Therefore, we are, saying no red meat because this has this obvious cause and effect. So once again, this is a hardcore example of my overall thesis and point of at what point does the government say influence our decisions. I think another philosophical error we're making is that we're thinking of autonomy as if it exists in a vacuum. And this was brought up earlier in the conversation. We are influenced by so many things. I decided to buy a Domino's pizza based on my frontal lobes, but my my hindbrain, I saw 10,000 commercials for Domino's on Hulu and YouTube and so forth and so on. And so our autonomy itself is almost being influenced and pulled upon in all these different directions. And so what point does the government get to say, like we're all saying, this is a no. Okay, yeah, a woman can rent out her uterus and her body, but nope, don't try to do that. Don't engage in sex work as a for-profit industry, right?
Right.
And so I think that's the spirit of our conversation.
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying, 100%. We could quibble like a lot about like intersex surgery and like, but I think that I do not think that parents making decisions with the best information that they have available on behalf of children who can't consent is wrong, and I would never condemn parents for doing that. That being said,
that's what I wanted to get clarity on.
Yeah. That being said, like, I think that again, we just need to acknowledge that the degree to which it is a violation of children's bodily autonomy is something we need to take into account when making these decisions, and that we should, I think, like as a prescriptive baseline, this is what makes society works, in my opinion, we should seek to minimize the amount to which people are infringing on the bodily autonomy of other people. I think that overall would improve society quite a bit. And the only other thing is that I agree. Society is like our individual choices are shaped by society to a large degree. But I think that when we're talking about like your choice to drink whiskey 7 days a week or something, and how that might affect wider society in the future, I don't necessarily think the solution is to have like a whiskey police that like comes around and like infringes on your freedom to drink whiskey. I think that the solution would be to improve our healthcare system, right? Like that I think the infringement on your bodily autonomy would have far more knock-on consequences that would be overly negative for society as a whole compared to just, you know, improving our healthcare system.
Well said. I agree with you.
Thanks.
That's what makes this topic so very, very, very complex, because we don't always know what the effects will be of certain decisions. We don't. There's always unintended consequences, and as Pathos was saying, no one is ever free from influence. No one is ever free from advertising. This is what we base our society on: advertising, influence, and all these things. And our decisions can also. It's a feedback loop. Not only does society influence our decisions, but our decisions influence society. What we do has people are called influencers for a reason. They dress in certain fashions, they do certain things, they talk certain ways, and this influences those around them, and they choose to do that. It's a feedback loop. It's very, very complex, and there's so much nuance there. It's hard to really draw strict lines in the sand. I'm trying, but as Top Dolphin noted earlier, my position shifts a little bit as new information comes, and I didn't think of it that way, so we kind of got to make a few exceptions here and there, and I think that's healthy to do, and I'm really enjoying this conversation so far. That's all I really wanted to say.
Yeah, like when we're talking about infringing on bodily autonomy in general, like the kinds of policy prescriptions, if we're going to talk about like societal wide responses to bodily autonomy, like I think that you could make a pretty good argument that like an individual exercising their right to not get vaccinated is to some degree infringing on the bodily autonomy of others by serving as a vector for a deadly pandemic disease, right? Like I think that that's an argument you can make about like, well, the infringing on bodily autonomy to get people who might otherwise be unwilling vaccinated might actually be a good thing for society. Now, we could I know Primus had like 100,000 panels on that topic, probably. So we don't have to go into that, but like that's just like another example of like a situation in which I can definitely see that there would be a compelling argument for infringing on someone's bodily autonomy. But we don't have to hash that out.
No, it's.
Today.
I mean, it's fine. It's fine. It's like, well, I mean,
Well,
what? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would be against government mandated vaccines, just to be very clear. However, I would be for in like requiring a vaccine passport or something to go to like the store or certain stores, like not the grocery store, but I'm talking like if you want to see a baseball game or
So,
participate in society in certain ways.
so
But government mandated vaccines, oh no, I'm not okay with that.
but
Yeah,
Wait,
to be clear, I was not saying that is what should be done. I'm just saying I can see a compelling argument for that
yeah,
on the basis of bodily autonomy
and I guess
and protecting
government-
bodily autonomy.
The government does mandate vaccines, though, in order to send
No,
my child to
they
a public
don't.
school. No, in order to send my child to a public school, I have a list of vaccinations.
But you don't
that I
have to
you
send
don't have
them
to go to
to
public
public
school.
school.
So, but no, it's not that it's. So let's back away from the absolute
Wait, anybody
illegality.
choose,
There is a
right, to go to
regulation.
private school. You don't
No.
have to go to public school.
No, what I'm trying to say is that there is a regulation that is in place that the government imposes upon the people. It's not an absolute regulation. It's not you're going to arrest you and throw you in jail for not having a vaccine. They're saying that if you want to participate in these public arenas, you need to get this vaccination. Just as much as the government says, if you want to drive on our public roads, you need to have a license and registration. Right?
Right, but that's
so just to
completely
clarify,
different
Pathos,
from
just real quick.
mandating a vaccine, right? Like, so the government saying we have this vaccine and you have to take it, right? You have to put the substance in your body is completely different from the government
just a
saying
scale.
we offer these services and you have to take this vaccine to participate in those
I hear what you're
services, right?
saying. I just think it's a difference in scale.
Okay,
The
well,
scale of
No,
Just-
it's not
just to
because
kinda-
because there is precedent, right? Legal, like from a legal sense, there's precedent to mandate vaccine in schools. There's precedent, like if the government wanted to mandate vaccines for travel, let's say, right, to get in and out of the country, there is not precedent, right? This is why, like, this is like a very hot topic. There is no legal precedent for the government to go and mandate that you put a vaccine in your body.
Well,
So
I think
that's why
So
these are
can I
different.
ask a clarifying question to Pathos? So, first of all, would you be in support of government mandated vaccines, and by that meaning uh, requiring a vaccine to participate in society, like go to go to the grocery store or go to a ball game or thing like that?
I'm
I'd like
assuming you're saying
to.
specifically the COVID-19 vaccine, right?
Oh, specifically the COVID-19. Just to be clear, yeah.
Um, can I give a moment to think about my answer
Of
before I
course,
respond?
Yeah.
please. Yeah, no,
Okay.
While you think, I can give my answer.
please, yes.
Because since I did kind of kick this off. But yeah, no, I would actually maybe be in favor of like a less stringent policy than what Wick is proposing. Like I just think that if you have a private business, you know, you should be able to mandate that your employees get vaccinated in order to work there. I think that if you are, you know, the federal government definitely has within its purview to mandate vaccinations for people who work for it. I think the federal government has the ability to and should like mandate vaccines for people in the armed forces. And I think that like health officials and police, like public servants, should probably also be vaccinated as contingent on them being employed. You know. Now, if people don't want to do that, that's totally fine. You can go find a different job that doesn't require vaccinations. But also like vaccine passports to travel to other countries, and vaccines for public school to attend public schools. Yeah, at 100%. But
Yep.
like I would probably stop short of being like you need documentation in order to go to the grocery store.
I think that's reasonable. That's where I would draw the line too. I think, though it worries me, and I'm not okay. My concern mainly is this, especially with employment when it comes to jobs and employment and things, because I understand the argument. But what we know is we know who is getting vaccinated and who is not. We know what demographics, and for a variety of reasons, we know that people of color are getting vaccinated at a far less rate. And so when you require these things, the people who are going to be hurt by these requirements, when you require the vaccine passports to work, when you require these things, it's not going to be me. You know, it's going to be people of color. It's going to be minorities, people who are already subject to so much harm when it comes to
Well,
systemic racism,
I,
and we know that's going to
I,
happen.
I hear that, but and this is something I was just thinking about this previously for something else, but like I hear that, but in the end, we do need people to comply, right? Like in the
Certainly,
end,
but there are other ways, correct? Like
sure, no,
I
no,
think
yeah, it
people have
doesn't.
been,
Yes, exactly, right. You're right there. There's not
yeah.
necessarily you have to do it this way, but in the end, we need people to comply, right? Like
I
I know
get
that
that, and
there's
I
a yeah.
understand. I understand, but a lot of states are doing now where they're paying people to get
And
their
that's not
vaccinations.
working. It's not working, you know?
I mean, but there are other things we can try. Hopefully,
No.
it works more. Hopefully, it goes further.
But
I
if it
hope.
doesn't,
Again, I just I don't know. I'm like I said, I don't know. When push comes to shove, I don't know. But as of now, as of today, I would be against it.
I guess I would just say in response to a lot of those concerns is that we already coerce people into doing labor that they don't want to do under capitalism. I see no reason why we should stop short of like coercing people into doing something that's actually positive for them using those same mechanisms. So
I don't
So
think
I
that's a
do
good
have an answer.
argument, though.
If labor
So
is corrosive, then literally every single thing you do is corrosive.
Well,
la-
but
la-
if
let
that's
me be clear.
coercive,
Labor under capitalism is coercive. Yes.
I think
well, but if you're signing off on that as like, oh, we already do it in this way, then we should do it also in this other way. You can apply it. That's not a good argument, I don't think.
Yeah, if
I don't think
labor
any of
is
this stuff is
coercive, so
honestly
is not
bodily.
like shitting on the floor.
What?
I don't think yeah, I don't
Yeah,
understand.
if
But I
labor
don't
is coercive, right, then so is like not shitting on the floor or like wearing clothes.
oh yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
Like these all things are coercive.
yeah,
Right?
But
sure.
I would
Tyranny.
argue the degree to which coercing someone into doing labor they don't want to do is greater than the coercion involved in like getting people to not shit on the floor. For example,
I don't know.
if you
Hold
shit
on.
on the floor in your own house, are you going to be like homeless?
If it's
No.
an apartment,
Or I
Oh.
mean, even if it's in an apartment, it might take a while of shitting on the floor to get kicked out.
Yeah, see, this is the thing that I think is difficult about these kinds of
as opposed to
conversations.
as opposed to if you don't work and don't participate in capitalism, you become the homeless person, and Pathos is hypothetical, right? Like, you know, that I'm sorry, I think being homeless is an inherently coercive thing and situation to be in. And that's why a lot of people do jobs they would rather not be doing.
Yeah, but I think this is the difficult thing about these kinds of conversations, because it's like in some cases we hold bodily autonomy and all that stuff to be like the highest virtue, and then in other cases we're like, oh well, we can sacrifice that because public good, or because moral offense, or because
Well, no,
whatever.
to be, I made it really clear in my argument for like getting people vaccinated even if they don't want to be, that them being unvaccinated is a direct infringement on other people's bodily autonomy.
I don't
Because
get that
they
at
then,
all. Can you explain that?
well, so for example, if you are a vector for a deadly disease, right? And or that disease might not be deadly, but might scar you for life, leave you with scarred organs inside, or some other negative effect that persists, right? And you don't want to be vaccinated, something that is not really going to harm you, and you are choosing to use your bodily autonomy to not get vaccinated. I would argue that you then being around other people is a direct infringement on their bodily autonomy, because you are presenting a direct threat to their ability to live.
Oh, okay. Well, if we're gonna go that far, then nobody has bodily autonomy, because you're always around pathogens, and you're always around cars, and you're always around people with guns. You don't have bodily autonomy. If we're gonna stretch the definition of bodily autonomy to include the avoidance of any and all violence towards your body, then okay, nobody has bodily autonomy. So in that case, no one's bodily autonomy is being infringed upon.
This is
Okay,
silly,
then we
right?
should, then
No.
in that case, we should put everyone at the barrel of a gun and get them vaccinated. Cool. I'm glad we agree.
Wait,
No, no.
wait. This is
What?
silly. dude.
I hope that's
That
not
does not
valid.
naturally follow.
Wait, so
Wait,
if
but bodily
someone
autonomy is
who,
not real.
Oh my
I can
God, I
use the
love
state
y'all.
to
Y'all are
force you to
hopping
get
up on-
vaccinated.
wait, Tubi,
Great.
That's
You
not
guys
what
are
he's
hopped
saying.
up
That's
on
not what he's
goofballs,
saying.
bro.
That's not what he's
if
saying.
someone,
To be clear,
No,
that's
you
not
guys
what
are hopped up on
yeah,
goofballs.
to be clear, that's not what he was simply saying, that you've stretched the definition, right?
Yeah.
He's not saying that.
I haven't. You are presenting a direct threat to my bodily autonomy, a direct threat to my ability to
he
live
disagrees.
as a
I have not
vector
at
for a
all.
deadly
I have not at
pathogen.
all. Body autonomy is the right for a person to govern what happens to their body without
Yeah, can I
external influence
govern
or
what happens
conversion.
to my body if you're a dangerous vector for a known deadly
Yeah,
pathogen?
to the same extent that you can when you're walking on the street and there's cars going
No,
by you, or you're walking on the street and somebody's choosing not to shoot up
pretending
the
this
neighborhood, or
situation,
yeah, to the
pretending
same
this
extent.
situation in the middle of a pandemic that has literally killed millions of people around the world is in any way the same to the situation you are putting forward is ridiculous. And I
No, I
hope you
think
can
it's
understand
ridiculous.
that.
No, I think it's ridiculous that you're stretching the definition of bodily
Wait,
autonomy
wait,
that
no,
You are
far.
Tubi.
Well, hold
you're
on,
presenting
hold
a
on.
direct threat to my
Well,
ability to
hold on.
live. How is this ridiculous?
To be-
Under
In the same way
pandemic
that your car
conditions.
is, in the same way that your car is, you're being ridiculous, I think. Now, you guys are obviously hopped up on goofballs. It's all good. I still love all of you guys, but no, I think that's stretching the definition. And the fact that you think that's a violation of your bodily autonomy, but then mandating people, and I know you didn't say this, but like these kinds of actions of mandating people to get vaccines, or employers forcing people or firing people because they didn't get vaccinated, that's not an infringement on their bodily autonomy. But you just making the choice with your own body not to get the vaccine and somehow walking around in public, now I'm limiting the bodily autonomy of other people. No, I'm not. I think that's ridiculous.
Tubi, you don't even disagree with this, okay? If you are diagnosed with a highly communicable disease, like if you got like fucking measles or something, and then you went out in public knowingly, like you would be considered like infringing on the bodily autonomy of other people and be sent to prison. The same way that if you have like an STI, and then you knowingly like have sex with someone without informing them, you are infringing on the bodily autonomy of other people, right? So like the vaccine thing is, if there is a highly contagious, right? A highly contagious pathogen like running through society, and you negligently, right, don't get the vaccine and then go participate in said society, but while you could very likely be infected, you could say in negligence infringing on the bodily autonomy of other people.
I don't agree with that. No. I think you're a health concern. I think like it's a problem that you haven't gotten vaccinated. I don't think you're limiting other people's ability to do anything. I disagree with that. Other
I
than be
think
around your
comparing.
presence. Other than
I'm
be around
sorry.
your presence.
I think comparing this to like car accidents or some shit like just natural hazards that we couldn't fully eliminate from the world if we wanted to, outside of like horribly authoritarian, like just pillows everywhere, pillows on every kind of sharp surface imaginable in society, right? Like you're like, oh, car accidents happen though. Well, like more than 10 times the amount of people who died in car
happens.
accidents
People
died
being
last
around
year.
you in the
Just a
world.
question for you, RiverboatJack.
So
Do you
to-
not
I-
think that it's authoritarian, however, to mandate vaccines?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm
Yeah,
in favor of it
she's
because
not
it
for
saves
that.
lives.
Oh, you are? Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think we should use coercive elements of society that are currently coercing people into doing things they don't want to do in a way that actually benefits people, as long as we're going to have those coercive elements around.
It's up to a point, I would agree, but that point would end on government mandated vaccines. I think we could use coercive power of society, but
so
again, I would not up to a
I
point.
I agree with you. However, what happens if we reach that point and we still aren't getting enough people vaccinated?
Because the principle
Then
of
we
the
have
freedom,
then we have to have a real kind of big discussion as a country on where our value lies.
Yeah,
Because I don't think there's an easy answer to this question either.
I think
don't
that
think
there
it's-
are
I don't think
circumstances in which we should be able to coerce people into getting vaccines. I mean, look, we already do that. We already coerce people into getting vaccines. Whether like you want to go to public schools? You want to go to public schools? Got to get vaccinated, all right?
Certainly, but and you agree with me, but then you go on to say that there will come a day when you would push for more.
Oh,
what
no,
day would that be?
I'm saying I agree with you, but if we ever hit like a threshold at which these people are presenting an existential threat to society because of their refusal to get a largely uninvasive and short and free medical treatment, well, then I think we have to have a different conversation on much more serious terms.
So
I think
the difference is, and this is where I think anti-vaxxers, or maybe not anti-vaxxers, like because anti-vaxxers don't think the vaccine does anything, right? But like people who are vaccine hesitant, right, would hang their hat on. It would be the amount of harm that's being done. Right, so if we take the same situation, and let's say we actually had a vaccine for the common cold, right? Well, if you don't take the vaccine for the common cold, then you can spread the common cold, and other people will get the common cold, and that hurts society, right? But is that enough to be a government mandate? On the other end of it, we can imagine a much more deadly disease than COVID-19, a much higher mortality rate, where bodies are piling up. And maybe then, all right, if like what's the death rate from COVID-19? It's like 2% or something like that. Someone else can correct me if I'm wrong. But like if it was 20%, then maybe the government would have a better idea. Maybe they're just saying that under the amount of harm that's being done, this is not worth it.
I think that
So
everyone has
relative.
that point though. Like I would even agree with RiverboatJack on this, that at a certain point that I would be like, yes, fuck freedom. We need to start doing that. I don't know if our lines here are the same again, but like
I think our lines are largely the same.
don't know.
I'm just going there and making the point that if we did reach that point, we would have to have a different conversation.
Yeah,
I'm not out here mandating, like
Okay.
arguing that we should mandate it right now.
I think we're very, 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 very far from that point, in my personal opinion.
Okay.
My whole point was that in
like
the
there's
case
so
where you
many
do
other
mandate,
things you can do, right? To like necessarily quote unquote without like mandating someone to put something in their arm. You can provide incentives. You can outlaw like certain people who do certain activities. You can restrict other freedoms that they have before you like violate the bodily autonomy that they have, right?
sure, I think
Yeah,
all of
but,
this
like,
stuff. I was just gonna say, my whole point was that the underlying principle guiding these actions, though, is not people's bodily autonomy. We're talking about
It
creating
absolutely
incentives.
is.
Wait,
Well,
it is 1,000%
Man,
bodily
I
autonomy.
sure wish I
right?
could talk. All these people on goofballs. Anyway, No, but I mean, I don't think it is because you guys are talking about creating incentives. That's social distortion of your beliefs. I mean, that's obviously coercive influence. It's not holding someone at a gunpoint and saying you got it, but it's social distortion of beliefs, which falls under the competency conditions. And also, we're talking about potentially mandating people get it. We're talking about potentially getting people fired from the job. It's fine if bodily autonomy is not the underlying principle that we're operating by. I don't really care about that. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't want to have to sit inside forever because no one's getting vaccinated. I want people to get vaccinated, but I think the underlying thing that we're concerned with here is public safety and public health, not bodily autonomy. We're
That
perfectly
public
willing to
safety and public health
infringe upon that right now.
directly relate to bodily autonomy.
They do. They do. Like Tubi, I think you're trying to narrow this down way too much. I was getting on RiverboatJack's case earlier about this. I think that we cannot separate this discussion from the discussion of bodily autonomy because they're very directly connected. And I understand that it can go into tangents that maybe are less related, but in this case, I think it has a very direct connection. Whether we should force people to have something put in their bodies against their will, I think that I would be firmly against that, except for in a world where it's got a much higher mortality rate, in a world where it's a much more deadly thing. And until we get to that point, I would be entirely against it.
So, like, another example of this would be like if we go back in time to 2014, right? Like, we do value bodily autonomy. It's just that we value the bodily autonomy of people who might get infected by people who already have a deadly disease, right? So, for example, in 2014, when the Ebola outbreak was happening, guess what? The U.S. sent armed guards to people's homes if they got infected with Ebola. This happened famously in Dallas. And those armed guards were there to make sure that those people were forced to stay inside their homes so that they did not go out and just infect other people with a deadly contagion. And, like, I think that's totally fine. That's totally fine. Because we are protecting the bodily autonomy of everyone else who doesn't want to die from Ebola.
Yeah, I thought it was silly when we talk about that, like, so, like, this is something that, like, I don't know, I thought this was just common sense, so maybe not. Like, not infecting people is, like, on its face, like, a bodily autonomy thing. Now, there are levels to it. Like, if you get the cold and you don't stay home, like, you are infringing on the bodily autonomy of the people around you, right? But I wouldn't necessarily say we should go throwing you in prison for that, right? However, if you get, like, AIDS and you go around infecting people, right, without them knowing, like, maybe you should be thrown in prison. Or HIV, you get HIV, you don't catch AIDS, but you have HIV and you go around infecting people without telling people. I would say, yeah, maybe that person should go to prison for infringing on the bodily autonomy of people. Bodily autonomy absolutely, like, applies to, like, contagions and pandemics and, like, diseases and infections.